All right, well, Labor has just released its full industrial relations changes, and no surprise, business groups and the opposition aren't happy. We can bring you new details this hour on who else will be affected other than employers over casuals and labour hire and the like. I'm live to Trudy McIntosh here at the desk. Trudy, what can you tell us?
Well, Andrew, we know now that truck drivers are also going to be caught up as a part of this industrial relations shake-up. That had not been flagged very publicly by the Workplace Relations Minister, Tony Burke. He has now introduced this legislation in the House and confirmed that he wants to create minimum standards for truck drivers across the country. Labor says this is about improving safety. We've seen deaths amongst truck drivers. There's been a big campaign from the Transport Workers Union. So now the Fair Work Commission is expected and proposed to get additional powers. They'll have discretion over what amounts to fair payments, and they'll also be able to hear disputes on unfair terminations. This, the Coalition believes, is essentially Labor reviving that controversial Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal. A bit of history on that. Don't forget, it was Julia Gillard's government who introduced it. It was then taken to that double dissolution election by Malcolm Turnbull, where he was then abolished it. So the Coalition believes this is essentially a revival of that big fight over truck drivers. This is Tony Burke a short time ago in the House. He says they have learnt the lessons from that tribunal that was abolished.
The bill contains a number of guardrails to ensure that the mistakes of the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal are not repeated. A notice of intention process gives parties an extended period to consider draft minimum standards orders before they become binding. Particular issues that are already comprehensively covered by other laws cannot be regulated.
So this is the so-called Closing the Loopholes bill. It's 284 pages to get across. To remind you of the key planks that are going to be a big fight amongst this. Firstly, it's the same job, same pay changes. That's the labour hire part of this. The government says it only affects around 67,000 workers. Companies like BHP and Qantas caught up. Extra rights for casual to become permanent if they'd like to. Tougher penalties for wage theft and minimum standards for the gig economy. That's that so-called employee-like provision. Tony Burke has conceded that, yeah, you'll have to pay more if you're ordering Uber Eats, but he says it's the price you should have to pay. Opposition leader Peter Dutton called these changes on Sunday agenda yesterday economy destroying. We heard from the shadow Workplace Relations Minister Michaelia Cash a short time ago on that carve-out for small business on labour hire that was unveiled this morning by Labor. She says it's still not good enough.
You might cut them out of this much of the legislation, but guess what? They still have to navigate the rest of the legislation. Andrew, you tell me, what small business in Australia has the time or the money to navigate the complexity that Mr Burke is today adding to the system? All that does is have a detrimental impact on their business and a detrimental impact on those they employ.
Expect to hear a lot more of that devil in the detail line from the Coalition, also business groups threatening to launch all-out war, really, against Labor. The timeline on this is really interesting, Andrew. 4 weeks of debate in the lower house, then it gets kicked to the Senate, likely an inquiry, so probably not in a position where this even gets to being voted on until much closer to Christmas.
Yeah, another end of the year stoush. Trudy McIntosh, thanks very much.